What does your crazy neighbor do to be labeled the crazy neighbor? She dug up my fancy flowers and replanted them in her own yard, 15 feet away. Had a neighbor who wouldn't let anyone use his driveway because he didn't want it to get dirty, anyone including himself. He parked on the street outside. If he thought you were having a party, he would drag a bunch of plastic bags full of God knows what to the end of his driveway so no one could turn around it. One time I came home and he was outside hosing it down in the rain. To his credit, I've never seen a cleaner driveway. I had a neighbor who would sneak into my yard at night and roll up my sod. It would be laid perfectly the night before, but I'd get up in the morning and it would be rolled up just like it was when it came from the store. I finally got pissed and spent the night laying by my back door with a baseball bat and a flashlight, ready to bonk the crap out of whoever it was. Sure enough, they came around 2 in the morning. And I stood up, turned the light on, and was face to face with 4 raccoons rolling up my sod, looking for bugs. Threatened to put giant signs across the wooded border between our properties if my other neighbor got into another border dispute with him. This was after stopping my excavator from doing his job. Finished grading the lot so we could plant grass, and threatening him if he got over the property line. He was 50 feet away from it and not taking down any trees. He finished his rant and left without ever introducing himself. When he's not complaining to the cops about my neighbor, he's doing everything legally possible to annoy the cops themselves. Used to live in a little town of 300 people where we had an elderly neighbor named Gladys. She would routinely look near our garbage can outside and take the recyclable bottles and cans we would leave for her. After we cleaned out a fish tank, we put the gravel and fake plants in a bag and left it on top of the garbage can because it was already full. About a week later, Gladys hollered at me while I was outside to come over as she wanted to show me something. She had taken that bag we had left and planted the fake plants along the side of her house. She said she wasn't real confident that they would make it, but so far they seemed to be thriving. I could only nod and compliment her on her green thumb. My neighbor sits in his yard, hides behind his plants and meows at people who pass by. He is not dangerous at all, but he is not right in the head either. His caretakers are his parents and they seem to be very nice people. His dad once told me, he just likes to be a cat, and left it at that. I didn't ask any more questions. She has a penchant for going around sticking nails in people's tires at night. This has happened dozens of times to nearly everyone on the street, though she's slowed down since more people started installing video cams and motion sensor lights in their driveways. We had one a while back that had a meth lab in the home. Crazy fights, yelling at all hours of the night. Dude would wander around the hood tweaked out crazy, and once he threw a Molotov cocktail out of the second floor window at another dude who was smashing up his car, screaming, "I'll frocking kill you. Motherfrocker." Those were interesting times. Pulled us over pretending to be a police officer, saying that we had somehow broken the law whilst pulling out of our driveway and that she was going to call it in. She isn't a cop lol. Edit. I considered using my dashcam video to actually call it in, but we had just moved in and I wasn't sure if she was the type of crazy to burn the house down or poison my dog. After chatting with the other neighbors, it turns out she's just the wannabe WA president in a neighborhood with no WA, so mostly harmless, just very annoying. I used to live in a WA. One of the members on the board lived across the street from my neighbor and I. He sent a letter to us saying that we all have to mow the lawn on the same day, at the same cut height, and in the same pattern to create uniformity in the neighborhood. My neighbor and I intentionally cut on different days and in opposite patterns just to annoy the guy. Took my parents to court because he lost in our WA chairman election. Some people just have too much free time. Edit. He actually demanded we pay his legal fees after he lost in court, twice. Next door lady standing on her driveway yelling at me because acorns have fallen from a large oak tree on my property onto said driveway, demanding that I cause the tree to cease and desist from this intentional criminal activity. He jumped in front of my car while I was driving down the road to yell at me for going through his trash at night. Told him it was probably raccoons. He refuses to believe it to this day. Years ago in rural Arizona we shared a pond with a crazy neighbor. More sad than anything, he was in his 40s and lived with his mother. Around 1988, a Vietnam veteran, he would walk out to our shared pond with a .45 and a box of 50 rounds. He would then absolutely unload on the pond while yelling, "Police his brass," and walk quietly home. This happened every 90 days for about 3 years. My sister's neighbor reported my sister to the police because her kids were playing in my sister's garden. Not for the usual reasons, too much noise etc. Nope. Because a volcano in Italy had erupted and the radiation would hurt them. My sister lives in the UK. When I first moved in, my neighbor walked into the house, unannounced. When my wife gets home, sometimes she wants to stay in her car having a phone conversation. He will come out and walk down the side of his house. checking his sprinkler controls and looks at my wife. He has two huge bushes he refuses to cut. It blocks our view of backing out of our driveway. The fire department came by to clear trees and bushes around the fire hydrants. The neighbor came out and yelled at the fireman. "This bush is older than you." Needless to say, I hope there are no house fires. She stalks us. Like every time I get home she'll walk outside and tell me I was either 3 minutes later getting home this time or that I'm home 2 minutes earlier and then ask me why. One time my friend and her sister came to pick me up. The neighbor was against her window with her hands and face pressed up on the glass trying to look at who was coming to pick me up. My friend and her sister were so terrified they called me telling me to hurry up. BC, a crazy lady was staring at them through a window. I replied, "Oh, it's just the stalker neighbor. Yeah, that was a funny day." We bought a house and on the day while we were unloading the first truckload, the neighbor came into our garage uninvited and started telling us what trees on our property he wanted us to cut down. Not the craziest but the frockin' audacity of some people. Not sure if this counts as crazy, but I have this neighbor who is part of a spiritual organization called Brahma Kumaris. Every time someone in the neighborhood is going through rough times, especially deaths in the family, she goes to their house and instead of offering condolences she preaches how they should join this organization and things will be better. She doesn't acknowledge anyone the rest of the time except the time when someone dies or a new family moves in the neighborhood to whom she preaches and gives books written by leaders of the organization. He was hopping my fence during the day when I was gone at work to use my backyard pool. When confronted, thanks to a snitch neighbor, he claimed he had an agreement with the previous tenant that he could use the pool whenever he wanted. Guess what? I'm not that tenant. I have a bunch of security cameras now. The adults in the family let their small, but surprisingly aggressive, dog out unleashed and without a muzzle. We live right next to a very busy road and public sidewalk and the dog will often chase children and bark at other dogs, cars, people. It's a mess and they ignore any reasoning. Funny enough, their children always have the dog on a leash and apologize if he goes after anyone. Had severe anger issues and yelled at anything or anyone he didn't like on the street. A few years ago he had a road rage incident and when he started banging on the other car's windows the occupants got out and beat him badly. During this he had a heart attack and now barely has enough mobility to walk to the mailbox and back. Also he doesn't yell anymore. I've heard way more than I need to about their health ailments and bowel movements. One night I'm in the backyard sitting in lawn chairs watching the stars with the wife when she pops out with a flashlight in our faces. I went off. "What the frockin' hell are you doing?" She apologized and left with no explanation. I could go on, but then I may start thinking about moving again. I was dog sitting, probably about 16 years old. My neighbor charged into the house while I was there with a gun, pointing it at my head and while on the phone with the owners of the dog claiming, "There's an intruder. Real life ain't Call of Duty. I remember you, Daniel. Frock you. Seriously." Called the police on people parked perfectly legal in front of their house. Took pictures of my partner's dad just working in the yard. Disappeared suddenly without a trace and then suddenly come back home in the dead of night 8 months later. Weirdos. Poisoned our dog once. I have a hedge in front of my house. When it gets trimmed and a single frocking leaf falls on her driveway, which she cleans every day, due to wind, she gets angry. One time she just let leaves blow onto her driveway. She then picked all of them up and put them in a bag, which she hung on my door, saying that, "It belongs to us," in an angry voice. One time in 2004, my mom participated in a TV show where a singer would visit your house and a professional chef made food for you and the singer. She constantly yelled at the camera crew and tried to hit their equipment with a broom. She called the FBI on me. Then she would call Crime Stoppers on me. He took it upon himself to mow my lawn while I was at work. My mower broke and I couldn't get it fixed. Needed to wait until next payday. Ran over a rock in my yard, damaged his mower, and asked that I pay to replace the blades. Dude, I didn't even ask you to mow my lawn. My guy was married but lived totally separate from his wife. She would visit every so often and he would travel to her too every now and then. Always wondered about that until I got a chance to be invited into his house. A hoarder of garage sale stuff. Dolls and just doll heads scattered around and boxes of toys. And whatever else you can imagine. Only a 2-foot path throughout the house. He also had an overgrown yard full of all kinds of plants. It was kind of cool looking but seeing an overgrown jungle after some years was a bit concerning. Nice guy and we would share a beer all the time. My best neighborhood friend. He had 3 little trees in his front yard and one day lemons appeared on them. We were like, whoa, those lemons grew so fast, and on closer inspection we realized they were fake lemons. Country boy moved to the city into the house next to mine. Landlord had done a terrible job with upkeep so the backyard was covered in dead brush and overgrowth. Country boy saw a country boy problem and employed the best country boy solution he could think of. He lit it all on fire the day after he moved in. We came outside one day to see him pouring bleach on the patio. Asked him what he was doing. He tells me, "The bugs are back. You see 'em? With their little wings? No bugs." I didn't have the heart to tell him. So I said, "You must have better eyes than me." Dude clearly has schizophrenia. Apparently he's had exterminators in 3 times in a year. I keep thinking about the kind of person that just says, "Oh yeah, I see 'em. That'll be $750. We used to live next to a woman that would have a disco party for her cats in her backyard at 2 a.m. every few days. She would put up a disco ball and party lights with music playing. It was a little bit odd, but what made it crazy was her dancing like a Native American performing a ritual around the disco ball. It's honestly one of the strangest things I've ever witnessed. One of my neighbors regularly goes off to anyone who will listen about how the government is spying on her. She has distributed letters to everyone in the complex with the deranged story full of conflicting claims. It gets really awkward when she starts yelling at tradespersons who are just there to do a job. I have to escort anyone working outside my unit because she will tear into them. She tried it once with me when I was doing maintenance on my AC unit. Figuring I was one of the tradespeople who were hired by the government to install spy equipment. I think she might have gotten new medication. But she still gives me the side eye wherever she walks past. My crazy neighbor yells out his window about killing the kids next door to him. The cops show up. He goes on meds for a few months and is fine. Then he randomly starts up again with the yelling. It's great. One time he threw a bucket of his pee out into the middle of the road while yelling at me that he wanted to have relations with my dog. Well, before I moved back into the house, our tenant thought he saw our neighbor watching his daughters and decided to stab the neighbor. So anyways, we came to the house and it looks like we had to get new sliding glass door and front door since the police broke them down to get to my tenant. It is his second offense, so he is in prison for life. So my neighbors probably thought my tenant is the crazy one. We have a neighbor we call the Screamer Lady, because when her kids were young she would basically sit at her window and run out and scream at anyone driving by if she felt they were going too fast, ranting about the safety of her children, who may or may not even be home at that point in the day. To this day she still sits and studies traffic and glares at motorcycles. Her kids are grown thankfully, so the screaming has ceased. My house backs up to a resort. I'm slowly accumulating junk cars near the property line. Eventually they'll build a fence. Then I'll get rid of all the junk. Bam. Free fence. Once dated a girl who lived across from Frank the Tank. Frank was a large man who didn't much like his wife, so he would spend hours on his riding mower basically going over the same 130 SQFT while sipping Coors Lights. Always in shorts that may have fit at one point but now made his thighs look like biscuits popping out of a can. Never a shirt. He would jiggle immensely. He also liked to watch the local younger girls run around. We had an older lady living in the apartment above us. We both had balconies with wooden floors. We would be hanging out on the balcony after dinner and she didn't love it, so she would hold a Windex bottle to the gaps between the boards and spray us with Windex, then quickly run inside and refuse to answer the door. Former crazy neighbor. Here. I, 23 at the time, lived alone in a basement unit in a not great part of town. My bedroom windows, being in the basement, lined up directly with a very busy street filled with bars and lots of traffic. While smoking cigarettes on my stoop, I often had a knife or baseball bat physically with me. To my neighbors, I often referred to a live-in boyfriend often, even though I lived alone. At times I would go as far as yelling at my fake boyfriend in my apartment when I heard other people in the hallway, storming out of the apartment and telling my neighbors what an asshole my boyfriend was. Also, my neighbors believed I didn't live alone. The downstairs neighbors next door seem to have completely ignored their back for a number of years. It's a completely overgrown mess. I can't really complain though, because a family of foxes seem to be living there now and they have adorable little fox cubs that I can see from my bedroom window. I used to live next to Screaming Guy. It was a cheap apartment and hearing through the walls didn't take a lot of effort. He would yell pretty regularly. At the phone? TV? Something? We could never figure out what it was. It was always during the day and we could never find sporting events that corresponded to the yelling times. He was always polite and soft-spoken when we interacted with him in person. Edit. And he lived alone and didn't have any pets we were aware of. The complex didn't allow them and we never saw any. Edit 2. Gaming seems unlikely demographically as he was in his 50s in 2006 to 2008. When we lived there, he was a bit outside of the gaming into adulthood generation. Not impossible though. Had a neighbor who would chase anyone and everyone off the 5 or 6 spaces of sidewalk in front of her house. All kids would use the road, because she'd be waiting at nearly all hours of the day and night. My neighbor in the flat upstairs likes to stand outside my open, ground floor window at 6 a.m. and argue with her dog. Like, I know you don't want to go home yet, but if you don't stop being a dig you're not getting your sausage roll. Or, I'm not the one who wanted to go out, so what's your problem? Happens at least twice a week. Murdered his wife. Dumped her body in the woods. Near skeletal remains found over a year later, and due to lack of anything beyond very damning circumstantial evidence, actually got away with it. At least he has so far. It's only been a couple years. Not kidding. I used to live next door to a guy who would mow the lawn only at night after 10 p.m. We called him the Midnight Mower. Hung a dead deer from his tree for 4 months after deer hunting season. Deals fent. Throws his rubbish out just anywhere on the estate, including prescription drugs spilling out the packet. Lets horrible little 12-year-olds run round trying to smash up cars. Play chicken. Bully smaller children and threatens to kill people who tell him to take the brat in hand. Edit. There are also some quirky alcoholics, but they're harmless. My previous neighbors were in their 80s. He used to dress up in what was ostensibly a hazmat suit and spray pesticide on his lawn. She would stand behind him in her moo-moo and slippers holding the pail with the pesticides. I may be that crazy neighbor. I have 300 houseplants. From the outside looking in, it looks like a jungle. Anyone else here suddenly realized the reason you don't have a crazy neighbor might be because you're the crazy neighbor? Edit. I have thoroughly enjoyed the stories from all of us crazy neighbors. Get drunk in the morning. Sing like a peacock high on LSD in the afternoon. Have a conversation with the other crazy neighbor 3 houses down from her balcony in the evening. Then have a screaming contest on the phone after midnight. Stuck a frocking barbecue fork in my cat. Edit. You. When did this blow up? Thanks for the rewards. Edit. There are too many comments I can't answer, so here you go. The cat is fully recovered and we couldn't get police because no one saw it happen. Happened on the day they moved in. They are from a country where cats are apparently worth nothing. My mom told me this. Edit. I guess they did it because they didn't want the cat at their house, but the cat was used to it from the old neighbors. She has 2 very big persimmon trees that provide a ton of fruit but insists selling them for $2 each. All the neighbors scoff at that price and nobody buys any, and all that fruit falls to the ground and goes to waste year after year. The lady is in her mid-80s. Shoots 2 shots of their gun almost every night to seemingly just piss on the neighborhood like a dog would. Strapped a GoPro to his chest and stood on his roof to video cleanup work we were having done on our property. Takes pictures of vehicles parked in our driveway. Told us as long as we lived here he would be our nightmare. Runs into his garage and closes the door if we are in our front yard. Has parked out front and stared at us. Calls the WA with complaints. Though he's a renter. The guy is an assistant U.S. attorney. My tax dollars at work. They steal the 3-foot-tall, chainsaw-carved beaver off of my front porch. Take it to bars. First day of hunting season, etc. It has a FB page one of them runs. And occasionally I'll get a text in the middle of the night with something like, "It's 2 a.m. Do you know where your beaver is?" And it will be dressed up on someone's front porch still facing my house like it's stalking me. It's 2 a.m. And suddenly you hear a sound. Going over to the window you look out. Wondering who's making it at that ungodly hour. It's the neighbor. Mowing his lawn. Now repeat this cycle. On the right, there's a bunch of spoiled rich frat boys who are throwing parties if the other neighbor isn't mowing. Sits off the balcony. Hangs out naked or near naked with the curtains and windows open. A lot. He cut down my row of cedar trees. Removed the branches. Sharpened the trunks and pointed them at my property. I never thought I would see the modern use of an abatis outside of trench warfare. His doghouse has electricity. The doghouse sits there in his backyard at night with a light on. Radio going. The dog loves listening to the radio, apparently. And a small electric fan in summer to keep him cool. It's not so much crazy as, perhaps, a bit eccentric. How many doghouses have electricity, lights, fans, and a radio playing for the dog's enjoyment? She has no indoor voice. I cannot emphasize this enough. The entire street can hear her. This nasal, vocal fry, carrying voice, in heavy Quebecois. I was in a meeting in my house with the window slightly open, and my coworkers and I could all hear her talk about how she loves picking the scabs on her head. Crazy Steve. Squatted in his dad's basement for years after he sold the house to someone that never lived in it. He would periodically take my dad's bike for rides around, bringing it back. He'd also get into the cars at my parents' late at night and listen to Christian radio. Again, he never stole anything, just sat in the cars at night and played the radio. I've got a good one. Where to even begin? He threatened to kill my neighbor's dog because he barked. He would stand at his window at night and look at our house. We could see him because he was illuminated by his TV. He would randomly clap throughout the night. He would also yell randomly at night. As kids he scared the crap out of me and my siblings with his strange behavior. Especially standing at his window at night. I had a neighbor who once walked into our apartment uninvited because she wanted to complain that we were being too noisy. It was actually a different apartment doing construction, and later gave the whole building bedbugs because she was letting homeless people stay in her apartment.